Hi, welcome to the American Indigenous channel. Today we're going to be going over these 8 questions that I made that challenge the African slave trade narrative. These 8 questions are going to be available in physical copies at the First American Street and Music Festival at Rodney Cook Senior Park, May 16th to the 17th, 2026 in Atlanta, Georgia. So the American Indigenous Street and Music Festival has now been rebranded to FASM Fest, First American Street and Music Festival. You can go to the link below. That link will take you to the website for the festival. If you have a business, you can become a sponsor and promote your business at the festival. If you want to give donations, which we highly need because we want to make this festival bigger and better than last year. So we want to have horse rides, going to have a lot more activities for the children, vendors, food trucks, DJing, all that great stuff. And it's an event that's free to the public. So donate and come out to see us May 16th to the 17th at Rodney Cook Senior Park, Atlanta, Georgia. Okay. So starting with these 8 questions here. Beginning with number 1. Where are the records and evidence of thousands of the slave ships? Literally, where are they? Because when I was in school, high school, middle school, you learn about this, slave trade narrative, this African slave trade narrative. They say that millions of Africans are brought over here, mainly dumped in South America, and then some trickled up into North America. Well, where are the records of all these slave ships? Because we're finding Viking ships, we're finding pirate ships at the bottom of the oceans. These people are putting these ships in museums. Um, you should be finding thousands of ships in this triangle area in the Atlantic Ocean like all the time. Because that's about how many, really hundreds of thousands of ships, because that's how many ships you would need in order to be shipping millions of people back and forth over the span of a couple hundreds of years. And yet they're nowhere to be found. But when you go to college and you write these papers, or even in high school and you're writing like papers, they want you to cite your evidence. You need to have your cite your sources and all that stuff. And yet the history textbooks don't cite their sources for where they're getting proof and evidence that millions of Africans were brought over here on hundreds of thousands of slave ships, because mathematically it would have to be that many, especially over that long period of time, over a couple hundreds hundreds of years, a couple of centuries. And even the records that you find online, they're not matching up with the numbers. You see thousands or tens of thousands. Like, no, 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 no. We were taught millions of Africans came over to the Americas. They were dumped in South America and the Caribbean, and then a little bit were in North America. So where's the evidence for that? For the millions, not the tens of thousands. Well, slavevoyage.org. No, the numbers are not adding up. Where's the other millions? Where are these historian people getting this information from if they don't have evidence to say that millions were coming over here? Where is it? Because these people want, when you go to college or you're in high school, you're writing a paper or you're coming with a thesis or something, they want you to bring proof. Okay, so you guys have to bring us proof that what you're saying is true. Because let's just be honest here, the United States government and Europeans in general have a track record of lying, especially when it comes to history. They just do. Okay, so you can't really trust what they say, because either they knowingly lie or they don't know that they're lying, but they're still pushing the lie. So if this doesn't logically make sense, y'all, it's probably lying. Which leads us to question number 2. If there are no records of which of the thousands of African tribes were enslaved, how do you know you came from Africa? So what I'm trying to say with this question is, let's say that somebody claims that they are from Asia. Well, you're not gonna really accept that answer if you want to know, well, where exactly in Asia do you come from, because there's so many different like peoples in Asia, different cultures, different tribes. With there's those tribes over there, different ethnic groups. So where in Asia? Like, I don't know, just somewhere in Asia. You're gonna dismiss that person and say they don't even know where they come from. That's the natural thing you would do. So why are you accepting that you come from West Africa, this generalized place with these hundreds of tribes and ethnic groups that don't consider themselves one monolith, and you just say, well, we come from West Africa? If there's no records stating which of these African slaves were taken from which tribes specifically and brought over to the Americas, how do you know that you come from West Africa then? So if this, example person that I just made up don't know where he come from in Asia, what evidence does he have to say that he come from Asia? So what evidence do you have to say that you come from Africa? If there are no even no records of which tribe, because let's look at this as a business transaction. Let's look at this as in the mindset of these traders supposedly who were supposedly doing this. So this is how you're making your money. This is your business. The records are very important because that is how you keep track of which peoples are going where, where to, where from, so you can get your money. And if there's a particular tribe of people that are do great work, right? Maybe they're more sturdy, they don't get sick as much. Maybe they're not dying as often during the voyage. Maybe they're reproducing better to make more slaves. Why would you not record that? Or maybe the ones that don't, maybe the ones that revolt, or they're constantly fighting against you, or they tend to kill the Europeans come and try and take them. Why would you not record that so you know which ones to avoid and which ones to go capture? Where's the records? Where's the evidence? Where are these historians that are making these history textbooks in the public schools? Where are they getting their information from? Where are they citing their sources from? Like literally, where are they getting the records from? There's no records. That's why they say West Africa, because they don't have proof of where exactly that you're coming from, and they don't have proof because they're lying. That's why when they give you a generalized term or a generalized area, just know that they're lying. Okay, West Africa. Wait, what? Where? If you have no records of which specific tribe you came from, at least pinpoint it down to a specific area. How do you know you came from Africa? And you can't say, well, I come from all the countries Zimbabwe, because those are relatively new from the mid 20th century. A lot of these countries are new. Some of them not even 100 years old yet. So the territories were different back then. People were migrating different places back then. So if you're talking about, oh, I'm from Ghana or whatever, like, okay, but the tribes that these people say that we came from span from Ghana on up. They weren't just concentrated in this modern day country that we now know as Ghana. So that doesn't make any sense. You can't say I'm Ghanaian and yet the tribe, the people that you supposedly come from, they stretch from that to all the way down to South Africa, right? Because then they say, well, South Africa, but it's the same person. So it doesn't make any sense. Question 3. Why did indigenous Americans go through so many identity changes if we were always African in the first place? So I put this question on here because nobody um, has yet to give me a logical answer to this. Why do we go from Negro to color to black to African American, and now they're trying to push the FBA thing that came from Treat and Sheed, which is basically black and African American all over again. Why do we go through so many identity changes? These weren't just like general names, these were identities. These were what the government actually put on paper to identify you as, and you accepted that. Nobody else in the world would have allowed that. Nobody else in the world would have allowed another people to come into their territory and dictate who you're gonna be. Especially giving you an identity that is supposed to be that's really an insult. Black, we know the negative connotations of black. When people say, "Oh, your mama black," or like "your black ass," using that as an insult. No one says, we say "your Italian ass," "your American ass." It doesn't hit the same because it's like, yes, they literally are Italian. They literally are Portuguese. They literally are that. So it's like it's not really an insult. You're just really kind of describing the person and talking about their mannerisms and their culture based off of where they literally came from. Black is just a straight up insult, and they put that down as your identity. That's not crazy to you. That's like saying oh yeah, I'm black. Like, yeah, I'm a spick. Oh yeah, I'm this. I like, oh yeah, I'm a piece of shit. It's literally that. So if they're not trying to hide something, the government's not trying to hide the fact that we were literally already here. Why did they give us so many identity changes? Why are they literally threatening people? Say if you don't identify as colored or African American or whatever, then we're gonna kill you, or we're gonna try to take your land, or we're gonna threaten you, or whatever. Why are they doing it if we were African in the first place? Especially when they were calling us colored. That's literally from the description, the copper colored peoples of the Americas. They just dropped the copper part, guys. Like when people when they say it, then they say it'd be like, oh, you're not learning, you're lying, you don't know what you're talking about. Where did the colored part come from? Why did they call us colored people? Cause skin and brown. Why didn't they call the Africans colored people? You notice that? They didn't call the Africans colored people. They didn't start calling other races of colored people colored until way later. And they still did not put Asians, Africans, Hindus, anybody else. They did not label them as an identity as color. They did that to us because originally it was copper color and they just dropped the copper part. Think about this. Question number 4. The vast majority of enslaved Africans that were brought here died. So how were they able to populate the Americas with low numbers? Remember I did that video about a year ago or so talking about why you wouldn't survive the African slave trade? And most of the Africans they wanted men for the labor. So there weren't even enough women, whether it was Native women, whether it was European women that they claimed like, oh well, there's some. Please show me where all these, white people, they weren't called white at the time, but use a modern day term. Please show me where these white men were allowing African male slaves to come over and impregnate all these white women when white women were already scarce in the first place. Please show me where that was happening to populate the North America, because I've heard this before. I was like, well, there's a, and these people aren't like joking around me. They're like being serious, and they say, yeah, that's why we're so light skinned. That doesn't make any sense. There was not enough Native Americans women over here. They weren't enough Europeans. That's why they're pushing the immigration so hard in the late 1800s. They just were not having enough children. The children where they were having, there was a high infant mortality rate. And it was really high amongst the few African slaves that were brought over here. A lot of them were dying; they just couldn't make it. So how are they repopulated? Especially in South America, they said the bulk of them went in South America. How do they populate South America? How do we have so many bronze or copper-colored Americans down there today in Brazil and Colombia and all these other places? Like, where did they come from? Or the original copper-colored Americans that were in Argentina that they killed off or mixed out? How did those people get over there? How did they manage to how did we manage to populate North and South America and the islands? If so many Africans were dying and we came from Africa, how did we do that? With magic? I don't think so. That's because we were already over here populating. Which tells you that they're lying about our population currently today, but that's for another time. Question number 5. Many Americans had to lie to census takers and identify as Negro in order to survive. If we were African, why was this necessary? Why did your ancestors have to lie and identify as Negro if they were already African? I think this question kind of speaks for itself. If you're African, you're not going to say that you are something that will put you at risk. Like that would even come into your mind. Like I'm African, or at that time they wouldn't refer to themselves as African. They would refer to themselves as their ethnic group that they come from. Let's say I'm Igbo, I'm this or that. They would not say they would not have been saying African. Even back then they would either list, not list, but they would either say their tribe, or at the very least they would say, if they did tell the truth, American Indian, but they wouldn't say African. Okay. So talk to your elders and see if they remember their parents or their grandparents telling them this or telling them not to tell people because they know that the government will come and kick in their door and threaten them about it. Because remember I made the video already, at the time the census takers were basically the police and you couldn't identify your own race until 1970. So before that they would just kind of put whatever they wanted. And because they're pushing this agenda that you were, not American, that you came from someplace else, if you identified as that, they'd either threaten you or kill somebody close to you or kill you or your whole family because they didn't want that to get out. They're really trying to push this lie. So in order to survive, a lot of them just lied and said, "Yeah, are you a Negro? Like you're some Negro?" Like even though that movie is fake, but that movie Roots, when they were whipping Kuda Kennedy and said, "What's your name?" My name is so. It was kind of doing it. But they say, "Are you Negro?" and you say no, they'll beat the shit out of you or kill you. So a lot of them, a lot of our ancestors are witnesses. So they say, "I'm just gonna be Negro. I'm gonna teach my children to say they're Negro so I can protect my children." Okay. Question 6. If the 1828 definition of American identifies copper-colored races of people, why is America not classified as a race if the people are still here? So I made the video already questioning why is American not classified as a race, because it seems as if the entire world can come over here and be American, That does not work literally any place else in the world. You cannot go to any other country, even if you're born there, if you do not have the lineage of the people that were already over there, they're not gonna consider you Chinese or Japanese or Korean or German or whatever. So if you bronze person or so-called black and you're born in Portugal, they're not gonna consider you Portuguese. Or you born in like Great Britain or the UK, they can say what they want, but they're not gonna consider you British for real. Because when you think of British people, you think of white people or Caucasians. You don't think of bronze people. You talk about the Moors. Like, okay, I'm not saying the Moors weren't there. I'm not saying that history didn't happen, but there is a lineage of Caucasian people who were over there in Great Britain for quite a period of time. Whether you want to talk about how their history was, or whether they were bathing or not, is besides the point. The point is they was over there. And when you hear British, you think of Caucasians because you know they were already over there living. That's a lineage. Okay, so just because you're born in another place, they say that's your nationality. That's not your what you would call like a race. Like they wouldn't consider you like a Caucasian that is Italian. That's part that has an Italian nationality, or Caucasian that has a French nationality. So considering you have Caucasian and Asian and East Indian and all this, why is America not classified as a race if we were totally separate from all these other continents? Right? We had or all these other land masses. So we had North America, South America, and then we expanded to the islands. So we developed separate from the world, from the rest of the world. So why would you not consider American a race of people? That is because once again they're trying to hide the fact that it is a race of people. Because then you're going to ask, well, who is that race of people? Because not the Native Americans. They don't say that it's them. So when they open up your identity or your country and they say anybody can come over here, anybody can be this, anybody can be that's so idealistic and childish that doesn't make any sense. But it starts to make sense when you realize they're just lying and trying to hide the history. Because then if you say anybody can be American, then nobody is. Okay. So number 7, many of our elders have told us we were always in the Americas and didn't come from Africa. Why would they lie to you? Why would your grandmother or your grandfather or your great grandparents? Why would they lie to you? Because I've heard these people online, these naysayers talking about, oh well, who told you that your grandma? Well, my grandma has no incentive to lie to me about this. The government has an incentive to lie because they're literally their entire existence is kind of based on the lie. So yeah, they have a reason to lie about this. Your grandmother or your grandfather or your elders don't have a reason to lie about this. And how can you say that? Why are these nations not challenging these $5 Indian people who are clearly lying to their children? Because like, okay, you don't match the description. The fact that we know that $5 Indians exist and they're making deals with the government basically because if you were a $5 Indian, that means you paid $5 under the table to the Dawes Rolls officer and they wrote you down as an Indian. So they're both in cahoots. So the government and the regular people on the ground are both in cahoots to push the lie of who is an American indigenous person and who is not. So, but you can clearly see that like, hey, the head of the Cherokee Nation, Billy Bob or whatever his name is, Billy, what is it, Bob Baker? This guy's clearly a Caucasian, clearly a $5 Indian, and he might if he he can look at himself and he know he's lying, but let's say he believes wholeheartedly he's Native American. All that means is that your dad or whoever he lied to you because like land was on the line, like all this was on the line. Now, going back to number 5, a lot of your elders will literally be threatened with death if they told the truth. So why would they lie to you if they had to go through that? They had all these things taken from them. And if they're still living in fear of that happening to them again, why would they lie to you? What is their incentive to lie to you? Because these people who are online, who these strangers who you don't know if it's a CIA agent, because it's not a conspiracy theory. Like they literally make accounts on social media to monitor what the public is, thinking, like monitor like where the public is like heading. They may make accounts that cause dissension and cause arguments and just and trolling and all that stuff, or just AI bots. Like you don't even know these are what you would consider real people. So they have an incentive to lie to you. If they're really working for the government, they're getting paid. Why? What reason or motivation would your elders and your family have to lie to you about this? Okay. Question number 8. How did so many of our ancestors acquire millions of acres of farmland if we were slaves from Africa? Because I can't find any, act of Congress or law that was put in place that gifted millions of acres of land to released African slaves. Because when we learn in the history, it's like one moment you're a slave, the next moment you just owned the land once slavery ended. And also, most of us were not slaves. The ones that were slaves, that's a small percentage of our population that were slaves. So how did these people who were slaves and who were not slaves obtain all this farmland? But yet these Caucasian immigrants that were coming over here, these Asian immigrants that come, all these other immigrants coming over here couldn't get no land, especially these Caucasians that have been here since the 14, 15, 1600s. They didn't have millions of acres of land. The government was trying to give it to them via the Homestead Act, but yet and still, we held millions of acres of farmland, which is farmable, arable land. You can produce food and crops and stuff to grow and to process and to sell. So I was like, that was the agriculture of America. That was like the life of America was our farmland, our agriculture. So who taught us that? Who taught us to grow on the land? You can't say the Europeans because they didn't know the knowledge. They didn't know how to grow over here. That's why they were dying so much. They had to get the help of the American people so they could survive and get colonies. The Native Americans couldn't have taught them because they were nomadic people. They weren't in one place long enough as a group in order to settle and create agriculture and have farmland. What actually happened was a lot of these plantations were just areas of farmland that were already there. These Europeans just took it over by force and said, "Hey, you're gonna these crops that you grow, you're gonna give it to us now instead of giving it to your own people." That's what happened. Because like, why would you clear land and cut down trees and all this stuff to farm land when you already literally have a farm existing right here, and all you gotta do is just hold people at gunpoint and threaten them and tell them you better give me these crops or else I'm gonna kill you. Or in a lot of these cases, they made deals with them. So the ones, because thinking about, well, what about the ones that were not enslaved? They have business deals. They say, hey, I'll pay you for it. And even though some of these slaves were being paid, that's why they could buy their freedom. Guys, you gotta like think and listen and critically think. If the slaves could buy their freedom, they were getting paid. They weren't working for free. So how can you say they were not getting paid, but then he bought a freedom? Where was he getting the money, and why would the slave master accept the money? Because it was a business transaction. It wasn't. A lot of times, it was not the push. It wasn't this like whole racial thing. These Europeans were just trying to survive over here too, and they're like, "Hey, you gave me the amount. You're supposed to work for me for 5 years. You went ahead and saved the money, and you just give it to me now. Like, all right, you're free to go." In a lot of cases, they didn't let them go. The American Indians would uprise and kill them. There was a ton of what you would call slave uprisings that happened that they don't talk about, which is one of the reasons why they had to end slavery, because it had gotten that bad. Okay, that they were gonna that a lot of us were gonna be like, well, we're not gonna grow for you at all. So good luck surviving the winters and not dying. So they said, okay, well, we'll just tone it down. We'll just end slavery officially, and we'll just enslave you if you go to jail. And guess that was good enough for us. And we kind of chilled out. But please tell me how so many of our ancestors acquired literally millions of acres of farmland if we were slaves from Africa. So we got it. We were slaves, and yet we got millions of acres of farmland before anybody else over here. Does that make sense? And we were brought over here, but we got it before anybody else, before the Native Americans, before the Caucasians, like before like that doesn't make any sense unless you realize that they're lying and we were already over here growing on the land before the Native Americans, before the Caucasian, before the Asians and everybody else come over here, because we are literally the American people, the only real Americans. We don't need the black label on there. And to be honest, you can drop the indigenous if you want to kind of, set it apart from the Native Americans, you can. But to be honest, that 1828 definition of American, that tells you right there. It's just they didn't say indigenous American, they didn't say black American, they didn't say colored American, they just said straight American. Like when you hear French, when you hear German, when you hear a person who's Italian or Portuguese or whatever, or Turkish, you don't have to put indigenous Turkish. You don't have to put it's just that. Okay, so we at this point we are just Americans, and that's what we were promoting at the first American Street and Music Festival that is going to happen at Rodney Cook Senior Park in Atlanta, Georgia, May 16th through the 17th. So, like I said in the beginning, please take a look at the link below. If you have a business, you can become a sponsor and promote your business. You can also donate to the festival, which I highly encourage you to do because it is free to the public, so you don't have to pay for tickets or anything. It's a family-friendly event, so you can bring your children, bring your elders, bring everybody. All right, it's open to the public. We're gonna have rides for the children. We're gonna have activities for children. We're gonna have food trucks and all that great stuff. So please donate so we can make this happen and we can make this festival bigger and better than the one we had last year. Thank you so much for sitting through this, and I hope to see you at the festival and at the next video.